What is your spookiest or most unexplainable real-life event that shook you to the core? Story 1. This happened to all the women in a house in Portland, Oregon. Backstory. My dad bought a house in 1965 for what he said was a steal at the time. It had been built around the 1920s and was huge, about 4,200 square feet, in the West Hills. Yes, like the Everclear song, with an incredible view just below the Maddock Mansion. He never knew why it was so cheap, but did not ask too many questions. The house was great except for the basement, which would flood in the winter with rainwater. His first marriage ended in the early 1970s, and he remained single for a few years. During this time, he claimed the FBI came to the house and asked him questions about the basement. He told me they said a woman had been found hanged in the garage just before he bought it, assumed unalive, and he figured this must have been why the house was so cheap. He said the place was empty when he moved in. He let the agents in, and they searched the basement. He remembered they would not tell him much, but the neighbors later told him the previous owners were involved in mischief. Lots of parties, fancy cars arriving at all hours, and time spent at Henry Thieves, a local restaurant. He married my mother in 1974, and they had me and my brother. When I was in high school, I remember some men visiting who said they were with the FBI. They talked about the demolition of Henry Thieves and said they wanted to re-examine the basement. My parents let them in and explained that it had been remodeled to fix the flooding problem. I had to leave and never heard the rest of their conversation. I did not think much about it again until years later. As I was growing up, my dad's 4 older children moved out when I was very young, going off to college and starting their own lives. His 2 boys sometimes stayed with us during the summer, but the girls never did. My mom and I always assumed the girls just did not like us. In the 1980s, when I was about 10, my mom began having dreams about a shadowy male figure that would hover over her at night. She would wake up and still see it there. She would scream, fight, swing at it, but it would not go away until my dad woke up. Sometimes she would crawl to the foot of the bed, and it would follow her, always keeping its face toward hers, disappearing only when my dad sat up. As a side note, the floor plan of the house was unusual. There was a master's wing. A single door led to a hallway with a separate sitting room, bathroom, and bedroom. The small hallway could be locked, as could each of the 3 rooms individually. The garage shared a wall with the master bedroom, and a windowless attic above the garage shared a wall with 2 of the upstairs bedrooms. My parents discovered something strange. If the door leading into the hallway was locked and the master bedroom at the end of the hall was locked, my mother would not have this dream. My dad tested this many times, sometimes on purpose, and sometimes by accident. Both he and my mom swore that 100% of the time, if even a single door was left unlocked at any point before morning, she would have the experience. The doors had to remain locked whenever someone left the room. If they opened the hallway door briefly at night to reach the bathroom, it had to be locked behind them again with a key. The key could not be left in the lock, and yes, they were the old-fashioned kind of keys. Despite being an extremely pacifist man, my father eventually began keeping an axe under his side of the bed. Through the 1980s, my mom went back to work and began hiring live-in nannies, all of whom happened to be women. None of them stayed for long. Their reasons for leaving were always vague but always tied to the house being creepy. We assumed they were just being polite, since my brother needed special care and was extremely challenging, and we figured they did not want to say anything unkind about him. When I was a teenager, by then well used to the habit of locking doors, my aunt came to stay with us after having surgery. One morning, she apologized to my mom, saying she must have woken the entire house. She described the exact same experience, waking to a dark figure, unmistakably male, hovering over her. It stayed there unmoving until she was exhausted from screaming. The guest room where she stayed bordered the garage. She had the experience every night until she left, and never again afterward. As adults, my sisters and I eventually became close. Years ago, when I was in my 30s and one of my sisters was in her 40s, we were having drinks and reminiscing about the good old days. I told her about the experience, the way it had been passed down through my mom's side of the family. I will never forget the look on her face. She kept glancing at her husband, then back at me, as I spoke. When I finished, her face was pale. She recounted her own stories. She told me her mom had gone through the same experience, along with a few others. One of the things her mom used to do was place strips of tape under the dining room chairs at night, each marked with a number. In the morning, she would check them and find the chairs out of order. She would reorganize them, only to find them rearranged again the next day. The chairs were never scattered or left askew, always neatly tucked in, just not in the same order she had left them. Children were never allowed to play in the dining room, and they all swore they had never touched the chairs. My sister then told me her own shadow man story. Both she and her sister had experienced it. Her husband could hardly believe it, even though she had told him before. It was the reason they refused to visit Dad or stay in that house until he retired and moved. He had always assumed it was just teenage nightmares or nonsense. The sister's bedroom bordered the upstairs attic above the garage. A small, almost half door connected that attic space to their bathroom. The bathroom itself had two doors, one leading to the hallway and the nanny's room, or guest room, and another leading into the sister's bedroom. They swore that if either the bathroom door or the bedroom door was left unlocked, they would see the shadow man. A few years ago, my wife and I were in Portland and decided to visit the old house. I knocked on the door, and the owner kindly let us see inside. They had remodeled extensively, and she seemed genuinely proud to show off the work they had done. Eventually, we went upstairs, and the small door leading to the garage attic was gone, replaced by a solid wall. I tapped the wall and asked how to get to the attic. The woman looked at me, confused. I explained that there was a hallway behind the wall that ran over the master bedroom and into the attic above the garage, a space about 20 by 30 feet. I told her my brother and I used to play there and store Christmas decorations, old clothes, and furniture. She grew noticeably skittish and told us politely that she needed to leave, so our visit had to end. Though very courteous, it was clear she did not want to continue the conversation. When we left, I looked up at the house. You could still see where the hallway leading to the garage had been. The siding clearly showed the outline of a hallway and a large room connected to the garage, easily 600 to 700 square feet of hall and attic space they had walled off. I can only assume it was done to put an end to the experience, or shadow man, as people had come to call it. I would really like to go back and see if anyone else has had strange experiences there. I wouldn't say I believe in ghosts, but I do believe there is something very strange about that house. I even checked Zillow recently and saw it had changed hands again. I wonder if anyone will ever discover and reopen that attic. It is obviously still there. Sorry if this story jumps around. I'm not much of a storyteller, but every word of it is true. Before we continue, do us a quick favor. Smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I have 3 stories. 1. When I was a kid, we lived in a house my dad built out in the country. This matters because I was there from the start when we poured the foundation, raised the frame, and finished the inside. No one had ever lived there before us. There had been no previous house on the property. It was literally just a field in the middle of nowhere that my dad thought would be a fun place to live. But strange things still happened. I saw shadows all the time. One night, I heard every dish in one of our cabinets fall and shatter. The next morning, everything was perfectly fine. Nothing broken, every cabinet intact. When I was about 8 or 9, I was playing in my room and went to get some toys out of my closet. I opened the closet door, and standing just inside was a woman in a Victorian-style white dress with a high lace collar and her brown hair pulled up in a bun. She was tall and thin, with the most severe, cold expression I had ever seen. I stumbled back and ran out of my room, crying. I grabbed my parents and dragged them back to see the scary lady in white, but when we returned, she was gone. The image of that woman is still burned into my mind. Fast forward 15 years, the house had been sold to a family friend of ours. They had 3 small children, and one of them began having nightmares. The friend remembered me telling them about the strange things that happened when I was a kid. Growing up in the 90s, all I could think at the time was maybe it had been built on an Indian burial ground. One day, the family friend called me and asked if I remembered anything about a woman in my bedroom when I was growing up. I told her about the woman in the closet, the high-necked lace dress, the dark hair in a bun. She told me she got chills because I had perfectly described the woman who kept appearing in her daughter's nightmares. As an adult, I finally asked my dad if there was any strange history connected to the property before we lived there. He told me the land we bought had been the site of a Comanche raid on a family trying to settle there in the 1800s. The entire family had been chased down by Native Americans on horseback and killed. The street we lived on was actually named after that family, something I had never realized. I had always assumed the name referred to an animal acting naturally, but it was in fact the family's last name, memorializing their escape attempt. 2. When I was 18, I decided I was a full-grown adult and needed to live on my own. I found a rundown apartment with the cheapest rent I could find in one of the worst parts of town and moved in. I had been there about 6 months, and those months were full of gunshots, police raids on neighbors' apartments, and even several people being killed. It was a terrible place to live. One night, about 6 months into my lease, I was asleep when I woke up around 1 in the morning to the sound of my door unlocking. My blood ran cold. I froze. The only thing I could think to do was pull the blanket completely over myself, lie as flat as possible, not move, and hope the duvet was fluffy enough to hide me. With my head under the covers, I heard footsteps walk in a slow circle around my living room, then into the kitchen, back into the living room, and finally into my bedroom. I could hear them moving around my bed, first to one side, then the other, then back again. Then they stopped and just stood there beside me. I remember holding my breath and trying not to move a muscle. Eventually, the footsteps turned, walked back out of the bedroom, circled the living room again, and then went out the door. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night and was too afraid to move. When I finally got up at 5 in the morning, the door was still unlocked. Nothing had been touched. Nothing had been moved. It was the creepiest experience of my life, but because it happened in the middle of the night and nothing was taken, I somehow convinced myself it had to be a ghost. I'm not sure why that seemed like the most logical answer, but that's what my brain settled on. I stayed in the apartment for another 6 months before moving back home to finish college. 3. When I was in high school, my dad was in a serious motorcycle accident. He was on his way to work, running a little late, when a couple of addicts in a stolen van ran a red light and hit him. We didn't find out until the end of the school day. The person who was supposed to pick me up was an hour late, and I was frustrated. When my cousin arrived instead, I was confused, but we went straight to the hospital, where they explained what had happened on the way. My dad was in surgery for several hours. The whole family sat in the waiting room, anxious for any news but unsure what to expect. Eventually, the surgery was successful, and he was moved to a room. Once he regained consciousness, he asked to speak to the man who had been with him at the scene. We assumed he meant the first police officer on site, but my dad was certain it wasn't. He explained that the moment he hit the ground, he knew he was in serious trouble. He tried to get up to assess the damage, but a man in cowboy boots appeared and told him to lie down and stay still, reassuring him that help would arrive soon. My dad said he was terrified. He was fully awake and aware of everything around him. He could feel his nose bleeding and dripping onto the street, feel the pebbles and asphalt pressed into the side of his face, and see the cowboy boots of the man who never left his side. Once the police arrived, ambulances and nurses appeared, and chaos erupted. He was soon transported to the hospital. Later, we spoke with the police officer who was the first responder on the scene. He assured us there had been absolutely no one there. My dad had been conscious and lying on the ground beneath his wrecked motorcycle, but there was no one standing with him and no one anywhere nearby. Family members tried to tell him it must have been Jesus in boots there to help him, but my dad just shook his head. Those boots were too real to be from heaven, he said. Personally, I think it was a guardian angel. My dad's just too stubborn to admit it. Story 3. Let me tell you a story about how a ghost harassed me when I was a child. Fair warning, it's a long one. When I was 10, my family moved into a new house out in the country. It was a cozy, homey place, the kind of house that instantly feels like a warm blanket on a cold day. Even now, when I think of home, that's the place I picture. Sometimes I catch myself daydreaming about buying it back someday. Millennial nonsense and all. But as welcoming as it felt, it was also odd. From what I've been told, the house started life in a nearby town before being physically moved about 6 miles out to the countryside. Afterwards, someone decided to add to it, about 25% more house, tacked on in what I can only describe as bold, creative DIY. A new master bedroom and bath here, an extended living room there, plus an enclosed screened-in back porch. It all looked normal enough on the surface, but something about it always felt just a little off. My parents took the new master bedroom. My sister and I ended up in the original master, the one tucked just behind the newer porch addition. To this day, I have no idea why anyone decided to add that porch. It cast our room in a perpetual twilight. Even at night, the moon had to be huge, perfectly positioned on the horizon, just to spill a little light into our space. Most nights it was dark as a cave. A whole year passed. Happily enough, we genuinely loved that house. But sometimes, about 30 minutes to an hour after my sister and I turned off the light, something would start bumping in the attic above us. Heavy thumps. Thump, 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 thump. Like someone with 2 peg legs stomping in circles. We even gave it a name, the thump bumps. We built elaborate stories around them, treating them like a quirky household feature. Honestly, if my unexplained experiences had stayed at that level, I probably would have chalked it up to rats, which, to be fair, we definitely had. The thing is, I've since dealt with rats, both wild and tame, and while they can make noises, they don't move like that. Why would a rat constantly circle? Why did it sound so heavy? If something that size were really jumping, you'd hear the slap of its tail on the floor. Rats have their own little lives. They're not automatons. Why would a rat take enormous, deliberate leaps in circles over and over for 2 to 3 hours at a stretch? But whatever the cause, we weren't afraid. It was just odd, not bad. Early summer rolled in, and by then I'd turned 11. One night I woke up suddenly to the unmistakable sound of someone doing dishes, running water, the soft clink of plates against one another. Normally, if my parents were up late, I'd see a glow from the kitchen spilling into the hallway. But that night, it was black as sin. Whoever was at the sink was working in complete darkness. I glanced at my clock, 2 a.m. Well, I was thirsty anyway. I got up, padded down the hall, and just as I reached the end, just as I turned the corner toward the living room, the sound cut off. Not faded, not slowed. It stopped. Mid-splash, mid-clink. No squeak of a faucet, no water slowing to a trickle, no dishes being set down. Just sudden, absolute silence. Nervous but determined, I slinked into the kitchen. The sink was bone dry, and everything was spotless, exactly as it should have been since we'd finished all the dishes the night before. I still remember the moonlight glinting off the faucet, cold and silver. I didn't know what to make of it, but nothing appeared out of place. I drank my water and went back to bed, uneasy but no worse for wear. I don't know how long it had been, only that it was summer and a Sunday. That morning I had been playing with my toy dinosaurs, 5 in total: Velociraptor, Iguanodon, Brachiosaurus, Styracosaurus, and one more herbivore whose name escapes me. I had lined them up neatly on my bed before heading off to church because of course arranging dinosaurs is serious business. I was the last one out of the house, making sure my dinosaurs were in order. When we finally returned, my parents unlocked the door and in we tromped, my brother first, dashing straight to his room, and me right behind him. I stopped in the doorway and felt real fear for the first time. My dinosaurs were no longer neatly lined up on my bed. They were scattered across it as if someone had been playing with them. One lay under the bed, another halfway under my pillow, and another at the foot of the bed. Worst of all, my Velociraptor had been jammed together with the Iguanodon, locked in what looked like a battle. This one still bothers me, because no matter how you interpret it, it's unsettling. If it wasn't the work of a spirit, then it had to be human. But who? My dad was unimaginative. My mom was busy, and while my sister or brother could have done it, I had been the last out of the house, specifically because I had spent so much time lining the dinosaurs up. I asked my sister if she had done anything, and she swore she hadn't. Also, the way the dinosaurs had been moved rules out the animal members of the household. To get the Iguanodon jammed into the Velociraptor's arms would have taken a lot of shoving and twisting. We had a Labrador and several barn cats, but all of them were outside. If it wasn't my family, that meant a stranger somehow broke into the house, only played with my dinosaurs, and then left without touching or taking anything else. Honestly, that thought was terrifying. There's nothing scarier than a human being sometimes, and I would much rather deal with ghosts than that. By this point, I was seriously unnerved. I started connecting dots, and I didn't like what they suggested. I put my dinosaurs away and told no one. Story 4. Many separate incidents, but I can sum them up into 2 cases. Case number 1. Grandpa. When I was 11, we moved to Mexico. My dad built our house himself over the course of a few months, but during the first 2 months we stayed at my grandma's house. That's where I had 2 unexplainable experiences. The first time, I was in the living room with my sister watching TV around midnight. Everyone else was asleep. The layout of the house made it impossible to get into the living room unnoticed. The front door opened into a short hallway with a door on the right leading into the living room. A dim light stayed on in the hallway all night, and the door had glass panes so you could see through it from where we sat. That night, my sister and I both clearly saw a black figure walk past the door. It looked like a tall, stocky man, but only his silhouette was clear. Other than that, he was pitch black. No features, no face. No one in the house fit that description, and the front door was locked. There was no way a stranger had walked in. My sister bolted to the bedroom while I sat frozen, staring at the doorway for a few moments before I could even move. Finally, I ran after her. When we told some of our cousins a few days later, they just nodded and said it was Grandpa. He had passed away only a year before we moved there, and apparently other people had seen his figure too. I saw him again about 2 weeks later. This time I was alone, and I was just as terrified as the first time. Case number 2. El Perdido, the lost one. After my dad finished building most of our house, we moved in. For 3 years, nothing strange happened. No shadows, no noises, nothing at all. Then came the summer of 2011 when I was 14. That summer, I got hooked on an online game and would stay up into the early hours of the morning playing. My parents didn't approve, so I'd sneak into the living room late at night to use the computer. One rainy night, I took advantage of the sound of the downpour to slip out without being heard. I crept to the living room, closed the kitchen door behind me, and sat down at the computer. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a loud "hey," but it came from both sides of the living room at once. Everyone else was asleep, and the voice didn't sound like anyone I knew. Even stranger, it was like a whisper and a shout at the same time. Impossibly soft, yet impossibly loud. Something no human could produce. I froze, heart pounding, staring into the darkness. After a few seconds, I forced myself to look around, but the living room was empty. No movement, no one there. I opened the door behind me and bolted back to my bed. I kept that story to myself so as not to scare or worry my brother and sister until more weird things started happening. One night, the 3 of us were in the living room together. My brother was at the computer, my sister was lying on the couch, and I was sitting in a chair. We were all facing the front wall of the house, with a clear view of a large window in the front door. Both had glass panes looking out into the yard. It was dark outside, but the living room lights were on, and so were the lights out front. That's when it happened. A black figure of a man ran past the window and then the front door. We all saw it at the same time. We jumped out of our seats, eyes darting from the window to the door, but there was nothing there. My brother immediately shut off the computer, and the three of us bolted out of the room as fast as we could. Another night stands out clearly in my memory. The three of us were getting ready for bed. My sister had just gone to her room, leaving only my brother and me. I was about to turn off the lights and walk across the kitchen to the hallway. My brother was standing at the opposite end of the kitchen, waiting for me. The moment I flipped the light switch, I caught it, out of the corner of my eye. A tall black figure walked right past me. I didn't just see it, I felt it. A faint breeze brushed across my face as it passed, like someone had physically walked by me in the dark. I immediately flipped the lights back on. My brother and I were still standing in the exact same spots as before, staring at each other with the same bewildered expression. At the same time, we both blurted out, "Did you just walk past me?" But we already knew the answer. It was impossible for either of us to have moved that far, that fast, in the dark. We locked eyes, both of us wide-eyed, the same silent thought written on our faces. No way. Without another word, I switched the lights off again, and the two of us bolted into our room. There were other, smaller incidents too, moments when each of us saw this thing alone on separate occasions, but the nights when we all witnessed, saw, or even felt it together were the worst, precisely because they were so unexplainable. Eventually, my sister mentioned all of this to a friend from down the block who'd grown up here. Her friend didn't even blink. She told my sister we'd seen El Perdido, the name locals had already given this thing, because people had been spotting him around our neighborhood for years before us. We haven't seen him since that summer, and I hope I never do, because I can't remember ever feeling a fear so absolute and paralyzing in my life. Story 5. 2 summers ago in 2020, my friend Lars and I were out playing disc golf late at night, as we often did on summer nights, starting around midnight. The course was just outside my house. We weren't very good at it, which is why what happened next is so unexplainable. We had almost finished the course, only 2 holes left. We were standing on a small, steep hill, supposed to throw the disc slightly to the right from our perspective. I threw mine first, then my friend made a very powerful throw. The hole we were aiming for was about 50 meters away. My friend's throw veered slightly to the left, landing in a small, bushy area just past the goal we were aiming for. We both roughly estimated where it had landed, since we saw it drop somewhere into the undergrowth of the mini nature park. Inside that nature area stood another disc golf goal, the final hole of the course. We went to the area where we thought the disc had landed. We had lost discs there before, so after 10 minutes of seriously searching, we still couldn't find it. Frustrated, I started trolling my friend, pretending I had found it and knew exactly where it was. He got really annoyed, but I thought it was hilarious. After a while, I stopped joking and continued the search. About 30 minutes in, I decided to walk up the stone elevation near the final goal, only 10 meters from where we thought the disc had landed. I was bored and wanted to mess with my friend again. This time, I pretended I had the missing disc and mimicked putting it on top of the disc golf goal while sitting down, so I couldn't even see the top. I didn't put anything up there. My friend had had enough of my antics and didn't play along this time. After another 5 minutes passed, we had been searching for nearly 45 minutes. I wandered farther from the stone elevation where the last goal stood, still scanning the bushes. Then my friend walked up to the final goal and actually found the disc sitting on top of it, the very disc we had been desperately looking for. Keep in mind, it would have been practically impossible for the disc to land there on its own. There were trees directly blocking the shot from where he had thrown it, and the goal was at an angle that made such a landing unrealistic. He turned to me and said, "Ha ha, you jerk," half angry and half accusing. "What? Did you find it?" I asked. He kept insisting that I had put it there. For a second, I thought maybe he was the one pulling a trick, trying to get me back for all my joking earlier. Some time passed while we argued over who had put it there. He believed I had done it, thinking I was pretending otherwise. I believed he had found it and was trying to blame me as a joke. I swore on my mother's life that I had not put it there. He kept calling me a liar, even though I knew I hadn't. The reason I believed him when he said he didn't do it was that he did most of the searching and seemed genuinely angry. He also grew annoyed whenever I insisted that I hadn't done it. I started questioning reality, going back and forth in my mind, convinced he must have done it because I knew I hadn't. But what would he gain from it? He wasted 45 minutes of his life searching for it. He didn't try to troll me back, and he didn't even seem eager to talk about it. For weeks afterward, I kept asking him if he had put it there, and every time he answered with something like, "No, you did," or "No, I didn't. Stop asking me about that because you're trying to troll me." From that day until today, I still message him every few weeks, "Did you put the disc on the goal?" just to see if he will finally confess. He still insists that I did it. I have sworn on my entire family and my life that I didn't, so now we just jokingly blame it on forest goblins. To this day, we are both forced to believe that the other person did it, purely based on logic. For the disc to land perfectly on top of the goal, it would have had to roll uphill and make a massive bounce without hitting the trees. I would guess the chances of that happening are as close to zero as possible. Still, I cannot find a logical explanation for it. Story 6. The following story is why I will never go to Pluckley Village, the most haunted village in England, on Halloween ever again. A bargain was made, and I will stick to it. Quite a few years ago, probably about 15 to 20 years ago, some friends and I used to go to Pluckley fairly regularly. It was not a short drive, but it was short enough that stopping in the pub for pie and a pint before wandering around was worth it. About 45 to 60 minutes drive. One year, the last time we went, about 15 years ago, we went on Halloween. It was me, my friend R who was driving, and my partner L who was also friends with R. We did the usual thing, piled into the car, listened to some music on the drive, and parked at the Black Horse. You can walk around the whole village in about an hour, even reaching the outskirts and coming back, but there is one particular spot you have to drive to, and that is important. We went to the pub, grabbed a drink and some snacks, then headed off. We had all eaten before we left, so one beer each was not going to affect us much, and off we went. We visited the cemetery, where a few ghosts are said to appear, including wailing women, monks, shadows, and even a mother searching for her child. But there were too many tourists around, making it too loud and crowded to feel the true atmosphere. We wandered a bit more and saw floating lights on the edge of the woods. They could have been the farmer who died trying to find his livestock, or they could have been kids. Then we decided to visit the other spot before heading back. We planned to have a proper drink closer to home, where we could walk to our respective houses without worrying about getting home. We went to the Highwayman's Oak, near Screaming Woods. Conjures an image or two, doesn't it? This spot is next to a field and is said to be where a highwayman caught by the authorities was chased down and speared to the tree with his own sword, then left there to die. But yeah, sure, it's video games that cause violence. We parked the car and sat inside, chatting. Over the next hour or so, mist started creeping over the field and the road, gathering around the car. But it was October. It was nighttime. That was normal, until it started coming in through the air vents. The mist was thick enough to see inside the car, pooling around my feet, possibly the others, but I was in the front passenger seat and could not see theirs. I felt a burning on my wrist from a bracelet given to me by a friend. They are religious. I am not. For protection. It was a simple leather and wood affair, but it was hot, not just warm burning. I started to take it off, but L in the back yelled. His necklace, a large cross, was hot. We turned the light on and looked at him. It had burned a cross-shaped mark into his chest and throat area. He started to take it off and it was my turn to yell, "No, leave it on. We don't know what they're protecting us from." I showed him and R my arm, where my bracelet, wood and leather, I repeat, had left singed marks. R looked sheepish and showed us a bracelet he had from a friend, a shark tooth and cord piece that, according to the friend who had gotten it from a tweaker in America, was meant to protect you from the gods of the water. It too had started marking his arm. R started the car. It would not start. He tried again. Still no luck. The mist was so thick and so high that we could barely see over it, not through it. There was no chance. It had formed a white puddle around the car, a ring stretching about 6 feet out. R started to open the door, and both L and I shouted at him, "No." We looked at each other, and I spoke up. "Okay, we get it. We are not welcome here. We will leave." Nothing. "How about you let us leave, and we never come back here on Halloween again?" The mist started to fade. The car still would not start. I said, "On my honor, we will never come back here on Halloween again." The mist was almost gone, and the car started. R began to speed away, but the car felt heavy, dragging, with headlights dim and flickering. I said, "Look, I made you a deal. Get out of the car. We leave. We do not come back on Halloween. We do not bother you, and you do not bother us." The car drove normally. The headlights returned to normal, and the mist was completely gone. Back at home, we went to our local pub and checked the marks on our arms and throats. They were still there, faded but almost gone, still shiny like scars. By the next day, they had completely disappeared from all of us. I have not been back to Pluckley at all, let alone on Halloween, and I am fairly certain I am happy to keep it that way. Story 7. I like the fact that this was posted on the same day I experienced something myself. About a month and a half ago, I used to be alone in my room at night, and I would sometimes feel a deep discomfort while trying to sleep or do anything. I am religious and at the same time not. I'm deeply invested in my faith. I don't break its rules, and I treat it as a red line. But I had stopped praying. I was learning how to pray, and then a series of events happened. For a while, I wasn't staying at home, and I still hadn't memorized everything. So I stopped praying because I simply wasn't at home and didn't have the sheet with me. I'm Muslim. Anyway, I would feel intense discomfort and sometimes even hear things. I'm not the type to be a scaredy cat. Usually I just grab my knife and roam the house, searching for the source. My friends even call me the warrior because I genuinely don't care about pain or fear. But every time I searched the house, I found nothing. Sometimes I would be lying on my bed facing the wall, suddenly feeling a surge of fear that made me turn around immediately. Other times I would be on the phone and catch something moving in my peripheral vision. This wasn't the first time I'd experienced things like this. I have plenty of stories about paranormal stuff happening in my house. Apparently, only I experience it. But here's the surprising part. I wasn't thinking about it when it happened, so it wasn't just me imagining things. That isn't a choice. I would simply be sitting there in peace. This happened on several days, but not in succession, about every 2 days or so. Each time I would feel that same specific feeling. Sometimes I stayed up late, playing the Quran and reciting verses that help in these situations. One night, my mom came in and woke me up. I told her what had been happening. She began reading the Quran to me, and I fell asleep instantly. Fast forward about 4 days, and I dreamed of a certain spirit, or something. It was like a dream inside a dream inside a dream. 4 dreams in one. I would wake up in one dream only to find myself in another. And here's the deal breaker. I saw the spirit. She was extremely tall, dressed in white. I don't even know if it was clothing or her skin. Her fingers were long, her skin rough, like that of a very old man, and her nails were long and sharp. She hunted me in the dreams, attacking me. I woke up the next morning deeply disturbed. I don't usually feel real fear, at most a little anxiety, but this struck me with a severe, visceral sense of horror unlike anything I'd felt before. After that dream, the feeling vanished for a while. It only happened once or twice again, but she didn't intervene in my dreams the same way, and she never appeared in real life like the things I'd experienced before. On September 2nd, the day before I traveled, I was visiting my driving instructor. She's a very good family friend. She even taught my mom back in the day. My mom and sister were there as well. While we were chatting, my sister accidentally mentioned that she'd had a nightmare. She was talking about not having a proper sleep schedule. Out of curiosity, I'm into this kind of stuff. I asked her what she dreamed about. She told me she saw a djinn called Alexa. I looked at my mom and asked my sister to describe her, and here it goes. She described the same thing I had seen, literally with the same details down to the smallest features. I was in shock and disbelief. I turned to my mom and said, "What did I tell you a few days ago?" She was stunned. My mom doesn't believe in this kind of thing and usually dismisses it as the human mind creating visions. I traveled the next day and didn't experience anything else until yesterday. I currently work at a gas station. Yesterday, at around 11:45 p.m., I had closed 10 to 20 minutes earlier. At about 11:30, I was in a good mood. I'd had music blasting for the past 2 hours or so. While following my usual routine and counting the money, I suddenly felt something behind me. I turned quickly in the direction where I thought I saw something, literally the same awareness I'd felt before I traveled. I checked the cameras but couldn't see anything. I grabbed my keys, at least I can stab, lol, and went around the aisles to check if there was anything. Nope, nothing again. I finished counting the money, completed my tasks, and left. I still haven't felt anything at home yet. This was the spookiest thing that happened to me. Story 8. Where do I even begin? I'm 20 now. I'm sorry if this is a bit messy. When we first arrived at this house, everything was chaotic. Moving day, you know the drill. We were having dinner, and from where I was sitting, I could just see the tiniest part of my parents' bed, just the corner. And there it was, a gray mass, sitting on my parents' bed. Days passed. My mom had the habit of kissing me and my siblings. Good night. She would kiss them first, then me. One night she was taking so long that I glanced at the door. A woman walked by. Long black hair. Very sophisticated look. White nightgown. That was not my mom. I screamed. My parents dismissed it as a nightmare, but it wasn't, and that woman would not leave. Then it started to get more intense. The gray mass would look at us, moving around the house. It wasn't violent, but it was unnerving. The woman, well, she would be present too. We could feel her in the air, smell her scent, hear the lullabies she would sing. Again, she never did anything bad. But they weren't the problem. Oh no, the real problem arrived with a new closet, a vintage one. This closet became part of my worst nightmares. I was about 16 at the time, when my parents brought it into my bedroom. It was beautiful, but strange. One of the doors would never stay closed for more than 30 seconds. It would almost seem to be violently pushed open, even after I shut it. Then it started to get cold around the closet. The room itself would feel like a fridge, the air heavy and biting. Soon, whatever was in there began creeping outside, becoming curious, then increasingly violent. It started with scratches, then bruises, then hickeys appearing on my skin without explanation. But the worst part wasn't the marks. It was the feeling of being watched while I slept, something so close, so invasive, and not being able to tell what it was. My ignorance was a blessing, though I didn't know it at the time. One night, I saw it. I thought I was having a nightmare, lying on my side, back turned, the thing coming out of the closet. It would pull on my shoulder and bring its face close to mine, just to watch me. It wasn't a nightmare. Whenever I became even partially aware of what was happening, it faded quickly, almost as if it didn't want to scare me, but it did. It was the tallest, darkest, skinniest black shade I had ever seen. It was emotionally and visually heavy, suffocating even. At the time, I was in a relationship. This is an important detail. My ex helped me a lot during this period. Time went by, and my lights would start to flicker. I would cry and scream for my mom in my sleep. When my younger brothers finally came to my bedroom, they were terrified, petrified. The room would be dark, with only me sitting on the bed. While sleeping, I was in the deepest, most intense pain. Around this time, I had my first nosebleed in my life. At 17, someone or something knocked 3 times on my door that led to the outside. This aggressive energy persisted for years. I was exhausted, depressed, and constantly anxious. One afternoon, I was supposed to leave with my dad at a certain hour. He's very strict about schedules, but I was late, and his patience snapped. He screamed, "We have to leave right now. I'm sick and tired of you always being late." That's when the growls began behind me. Low at first, then louder and louder. I couldn't see it, but I could feel its anger, almost as if it were furious at my dad on my behalf. My heart raced as I bolted out of my bedroom. My relationship with my father was rocky at the time, and one night while he was out with friends, I had a strange dream. In it, my father had an accident at a very specific point on a road. He wasn't hurt, almost as if the incident was only meant to frighten him. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my parents talking. They were describing the exact event I'd dreamed about. In that moment, everything clicked into place. I told my dad about the dream, and he asked if someone or something wanted to hurt him. I said, "No, it's possessive. It's about me. It thinks I belong to it." We screamed at each other, and I didn't like it. The closet was eventually removed, but the energy didn't leave with it. Everyone in the house could feel it. One day, as I picked up my cat, he suddenly looked over my shoulder and went wild, scratching my ear so badly that it bled. My cats refused to enter my bedroom after that. My mom began noticing the freezing air in my room. My brothers would hear things moving or breaking while I wasn't even home, and the smell, that horrible, rotting smell, would creep through the house. Now things are calmer, but the feeling still lingers. It's as if the house remembers. Whenever I dare to talk about it to my parents, something seems to press against my throat and give me the worst headaches, like a warning not to speak. Story 9. My father-in-law haunts my family's lake house. He had been going to summer camp on Lake Winnipesaukee since he was a little kid. Same camp, same island, every summer, alongside his brothers. It became part of who he was. In the 80s, the camp shut down and sold off the lots on the island to former campers. My father-in-law bought one of those properties and began bringing his own children there every summer, keeping the tradition alive. Fast forward 30 years, I marry his oldest daughter, and soon I'm spending my weekends at the lake with my wife and her family, creating our own memories there. But after a few summers, my father-in-law succumbed to leukemia. He was gone, at least that's what everyone thought. Every summer since my father-in-law passed away, I've had at least one unexplainable incident at the lake house. It almost always happens on the weekends. We either open the house for summer or close it down for winter. Sometimes it happens when the whole family gathers, like he's more active when the place is full of life. The first time I realized something was amiss was the summer right after his passing. As the oldest male in the family now, the heavy lifting had become my job. That day, I was unloading our boatload of supplies at the dock into a little wagon, hauling all my wife's things from the boat to the house. I'd carefully stacked everything in a neat pyramid-like shape so that nothing would shift or tumble while I pulled it up the path. After 3 trips from the boat to the wagon, I had just one bag left to grab. As I turned back toward the wagon with the final bag, I froze. A brand new rug, still rolled up and wrapped in plastic. The one I had buried under all the other bags so it wouldn't roll off, was now leaning at a 45-degree angle on the side of the wagon, jutting up into the air. Not a single bag had shifted to cause it. It was exactly where I was standing, right in front of me, completely out of place. My blood ran cold. As I pulled the wagon toward the house, I couldn't help but call out to my wife, "Your dad says hello." The following day, while I was alone in my brother-in-law's little shack, affectionately called the Love Shack, I was busy setting up furniture and making beds, getting camp ready for the incoming visitors. Suddenly, something small and hard struck me in the back of the head and tumbled to the floor. I spun around and looked up, expecting to see a squirrel or some rodent scurrying across the rafters, but there was nothing, just the open pitch of the roof above me. An acorn. He'd said hello again. I didn't wait around for a third greeting. I bolted out of there. The next summer, we had a small family reunion, with my wife's cousins and all their kids spending the weekend at the lake. One afternoon, I was out back behind the house, grilling lunch for everyone. The rest of the family was down at the beach, or playing in the water. As I walked in through the back door, a balled-up Pikachu bathrobe flew down the stairs and hit me square in the face. Fuming, I yanked the robe off my head and stormed up the stairs, ready to give whichever cousin had done it a good talking to. But when I got upstairs, there was nobody. The house was empty, completely alone. Nobody believed me when I told them what had happened. The following summer was when my wife finally started to believe it. For some reason, she had been poking around under our cabin, the one where her mom and dad used to stay before we built the main house, when she unearthed something odd. Half buried in the damp earth, sunk deep after years of rain and runoff, was an old set of wrenches. Rusted, heavy, and forgotten. They had clearly been there for a long time. She was at the sink, washing the old tools off, when I walked into the kitchen and scoffed. I told her, "You don't use water to clean metal tools. Use WD-40 or something like that." She rolled her eyes and said, "I didn't know what I was talking about." I fired back, "If your father were here right now, he'd tell you the same thing." Without missing a beat, she said no, he wouldn't, sounding absolutely sure of herself. And that's when it happened. A bar stool, sitting right between the two of us, hopped about an inch off the floor with a sharp thud. It didn't scrape or slide, it lifted and landed. We both froze, staring at the stool. My heart was pounding. I looked at her and said, "See, I told you your dad agrees." From that day on, she stopped questioning my encounters with her father. Story 10. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in my living room when a strange chill crept over me. It wasn't just a draft. It rolled slowly down my shoulders and spine like icy fingers. Seconds later, I felt a weight on my right shoulder, as if someone had placed their hand there. I bolted for the kitchen, heart hammering, but as soon as I reached the table, my entire body locked up. I couldn't move. My muscles refused to work. Then the hand came back. This time it slid up and closed around my neck. I couldn't breathe. I was spluttering, clawing for air, convinced I'd been stuck there for ages, though in reality it was probably only 30 seconds. And then just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. My body was free. I sprinted upstairs and dove under my covers, shaking, too terrified to even turn the lights off. I was still awake at around 3:30 in the morning, shaken by what had happened earlier that day. I had planned to try and get some sleep, but as soon as I laid my head on the pillow, something crashed in the attic above my room. The sound was so loud that the impact made my bed shake slightly. That cold feeling returned and my body tensed up, this time not frozen but absolutely terrified. I kept listening for any sign of someone or something up there, but nothing followed. When I glanced at the clock, it read 3:43 in the morning, and I made a note of it. A little over 10 minutes later, I heard creaking above my head, slow but heavy footsteps in the attic once again. Then came a small thud, followed by a scraping sound, like a box being dragged across the floor. I pulled the duvet over my ears, just wanting it to end so I could rest and forget about everything. The thuds and scrapes kept repeating over and over, as though someone were rearranging things up there. I even wondered if I was asleep, so I sent a text to my sister, thinking that if I woke up and it was still there, I would know I hadn't been dreaming. After about 20 minutes of the noise, it suddenly stopped. I managed to fall asleep fairly quickly, probably out of exhaustion from everything that had happened. The next morning, I woke to the chime of a text from my sister, replying to the message I had sent her during the night. I didn't respond right away. My mind was still occupied with what had happened. When I glanced at the clock to check the time, I froze. It still read 3:43 in the morning. It hadn't changed. I knew it was well into the morning from the light coming through the window, so how could it still show 3:43? A chill ran through me. I knew that 3 in the morning is often called a time of demonic activity, but I didn't want to jump straight to that conclusion. My sister came into my room a little over 10 minutes later and asked if I had any batteries, saying her clock had stopped during the night too. My heart started to race, and I asked her what time it had stopped at. She told me it was 3:43 in the morning. I immediately checked the text I had sent her, and sure enough, it was marked 3:43 in the morning as well. That couldn't be right. I knew it had been at least 20 minutes, if not more, between me checking the clock and sending that message. I got straight out of bed and decided to check the attic. My sister saw me pulling down the ladder and asked what I was doing. I gave her a quick rundown of everything, the time, the text, and the noises I had heard. She isn't superstitious, but even she looked unsettled. I climbed up into the attic, switched on the light, and froze. Not a single thing was out of place. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. These kinds of events have happened multiple times now. Each time, both my clock and my sister's stop at 3:43 in the morning. After this had happened 2 or 3 times, I realized it only occurs when I'm the one awake at 3:43. My sister and I even experimented to see if it would happen when she was awake then, but it only happens if it's me. I am, and still am, completely stumped about what's going on. I can't help but feel I may have angered some sort of entity in the house. Pretty spooky and unexplainable if you ask me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.